A warm breeze drifted through the upstairs windows of a modest New London home on a late August evening in 1977. Inside, two of the Harper children, Pete, age 10, and his older sister, Janet, sat up in bed, listening with growing apprehension. You see, they heard it. They heard it again, a faint shuffling noise that seemed to come from the floor right beneath them.
Ooh, that's creepy. Ooh-wee.
John, how did you get here, brother?
Man, I don't know what happened. I was just surfing the internet, trying to find something to do, and here we are.
Daggone, YouTube is coming in strong over here all of a sudden. They're just like beaming Scotty right in.
Yeah, man, you creeped me out there. I didn't know what was going on.
Well, for anyone that doesn't know, this is John, and he's typically known as the Midnight Spectre, and he has this channel called Dark Storytime, and you're going to find that on the YouTube machine. You're going to also find it on the TikTok machine. And though this may shock you, this was all pre-planned.
Ooh.
I know. No one hardly believes this kind of stuff. But yeah, so what happened is I actually ran into John probably, I don't know, man, it's 8 months ago, 9 months ago.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Feels like a little while, but I ran into his channel and I'm like, man, this guy, he's just like me to a degree, does storytelling, but he might do some things better than me. So I was like, I got to check this channel out. But the more I started listening, I'm like, man, I really want to collaborate with this guy. I think you guys would absolutely love it. So what I'm going to do is make things a little bit easier for you guys. In the description down below, I'm going to put links to his TikTok channel and to his YouTube machine. If you could do me all a favor, as soon as we get done with this channel, jump over to his, hit the subscribe button so you don't forget, because let's be honest, we all forget from time to time. But I thought, what an awesome thing to do, but to bring John along and that we have a conversation. So to a degree, this is kind of like an interview style because we're going to learn about John a little bit too. But before we get too deep into it, John, tell all the wonderful listeners and those that's watching on the YouTube machine a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your channel.
Well, as you know, my name is John. I am also known as the Midnight Spectre. And for those of you that do know the channel, you know that catchphrase, leave a light on. And for those of you that don't, well, now you know. If you take a little run over to my channel, you'll find that I do some creepy stories, but I like to speak to the viewer themselves because in my content, I like to know what it is that scares the people and what the people have been through, because I myself have been down that dark road and I know what it's like.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the beauty of the paranormal, which is what I try to explain all the time. You know, when we're out here talking about these stories, not just because we're like, man, I just really want to tell a story about, in this case, the Enfield Poltergeist. We've had our own experiences. And a lot of times we're just trying to figure out, you know, what caused me to have this experience. So John does an amazing job with that. And I've personally, I would say that I probably binge a ton of his content. So if you're going over to his stuff, binge through his stuff, check it out. We've actually done a couple stories that kind of have coincided through time. So it's kind of cool to hear his spin on it too. So that's why I like to venture over. But we have a very similar style as far as storytelling, but he's right. He digs into a lot of what I'm going to say fans, what your fans like.
Oh, yeah. You know, it's like I see a lot of people come forward about their stories and I love it. But you know what really gets me? It's the people that don't come forward that I know they got something in there. And it's just like they don't want to say anything because they don't want to get that look from people. But, you know, say something, because 9 times out of 10, those people looking at you, they're waiting to see if you have something they can relate to, because they've probably been through something just as bad.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's amazing having started this podcast and the YouTube channels. It amazed me the amount of people that comes forward and go, hey, you know, I don't really tell people this.
Yeah.
But you just told a story a couple weeks ago about what you experienced. And since you said it, I'm going to tell you, just don't tell no one that I told you.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, man, you tell me. And then after I hit it, I'm like, we could do a podcast episode on that. No. Let's not do that. It's like, man, dang.
They get scared away.
Y'all screwed up. But what I thought it would be cool to do is for me and John to go through this entire episode of the Enfield Poltergeist. And we're going to do most of it on my channel. And then guess what? We're going to do a little bit more on his channel. By most, I mean, we're probably going to be 50-50 on this. But listen, it's okay. So if you don't know the Enfield Poltergeist, you definitely want to check it out. I think what's going to be fun is we're going to kind of go through the stuff here. And then once we get to his channel, it's going to be kind of that conclusion and some of our final thoughts is the best way to put it.
Oh, yeah.
So the one thing that I'll say, John, is when we talk about the Enfield Poltergeist, the first thing that I try to do with all of my listeners and all those that watch on the YouTube machine, I try to take them back to that specific moment. So we're talking 1970s, right? There's disco music.
Yes.
For me, that would be like, what was that group? That high pitched voice, man. Why can't I think of their name? The guy with the high pitched voice. And
I know exactly who you're talking. Is it the Bee Gees?
The Bee Gees. That's it. Yes.
Yeah, there we go.
That's the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of disco.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they were like the kings of disco, in my opinion.
Yes.
But there was a shifting cultural norm. So things was kind of changing in the 1970s. And truly an era was formed that kind of differed from the rest, is what I'll say. But while obviously everything was moving forward, something dark and unexplainable stirring in that ordinary house on Green Street in Enfield, London. Now, that was a house, everyone needs to understand that for 13 years, there was no paranormal activity that was ever listed. And that was all until the night of August 30th of 1977. That's when everything changed.
As a parent, when you put the kids to bed, you expect things to be quiet and calm, and then you expect to be able to have your moment of peace and do what you need to do. But that's not really what happened to Peggy, a mother of four. So she was just moving about, doing her thing, quieting the house, only when she hears noise coming from her daughter's bedroom. And when I say noise, I'm being kind, because it was more of like a racket. And when you've got kids, kids can get pretty crazy. It's that last rush of energy right before bed. So, as any good mother in a bad mood would do, she marched up those stairs and she walked in that room to shake her hand and give those girls a piece of her mind. But that's when things got a little creepy, because as she went in there to tell them to stop making the racket, they were freaked out. And anyone who has children knows that when you see fear in your child's eye, there's something that just does something to you. It sparks a primal nerve, and she's listening to her daughters and they're telling her, Ma, something's going on. Something's making our bed shake. They don't know what to do. So being the mother that she was, she said, hey, listen, I understand you're scared, but you just got to quiet down and you need to go back to bed. And before she left them, she made sure they were down in bed and she went on about her business.
The crazy part is, I think as a parent, like the worst fear for us is not being able to protect or provide for our children.
Yes.
And it's one of those things in all the stories, and a lot doesn't really explain some of this. I found this when we did research on this the first time. I'm going to be honest for everyone. The other channel that I have that I do with Nick, we did a very extensive 2-episode series on this, and I literally just stole everything from that, because I was like, you know what? I did the research once. Let's save some time here. But the interesting thing was, it was Pete and Janet that were in the room when the bed started shaking. Oof. So for them, it was, again, you got to kind of think, these kids are in bed. They've not experienced anything their entire lives. 13 years of their life, in fact, was completely carefree. Now they're in this room. It's dark. There's moonlight casts these eerie shadows. It's probably on the walls, because at least that's what I think of when I was a kid. And then all of a sudden the atmosphere is almost like an unexplainable dread as that bed would start to rock. Now, anyone that knows when you get on a bed, you got that creaking sound, you got that little bit of a grind that's on those floorboards back in the day.
Yeah.
But now you got these two kids that the bed is shaking to the point to where their mom hears it on the opposite side of the house. To then run in there and see it firsthand, I would assume probably, and I'm just going to throw this out there to John, but if I would have walked in there, the first assumption I would have had is my kids are doing this. This is some type of practical joke. And at this point, it's not funny because I don't want to spend the entire night playing these games. So she probably walked in mad like I would have been.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I'm actually a little surprised at how cool she was able to keep it, especially with 4 kids, you know,
right?
Because it's bedtime. It's time to quiet down. It's probably been a long day for her. And to hear that racket, you know, and she walks in there and she doesn't freak out. I mean, I probably would have went in there. I probably would have kicked the door open and said, go to bed.
Probably. Me too. I found it fascinating.
Kudos to her.
When I did research on this, I thought it was funny because I'm like, this is exactly what I would have done. When she went in there, you know, she saw what was going on. She assumed it was the kids. The first thing she did, she searched for any kind of tricks, any kind of mechanical devices, or any kind of natural explanation that she could lock up. And I'm sitting there thinking, that would have been me. I would have been like,
yeah,
Pete, Janet, go to sleep. Mom, the bed is shaking on its own. We're not doing this. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me come over here. And then you see it shaking. You're like, okay, well, they're not doing this. And, you know, I'd be looking at old Petey boy going, all right, Pete, you put something on this bed. Like, I don't know what they would have created as far as they put it, mechanical devices, but
right.
But they literally couldn't find anything. So, I mean, at that point, it's like, well, what do you do? And then how do you tell them, all right, well, listen, we looked underneath the bed. There's no monsters underneath there. Go back to sleep.
Yeah.
I don't think that would have happened exactly the way that we're imagining right now. But
yeah.
But I do find it fascinating that they lived there for 13 years with absolutely nothing occurring.
Yeah. That's
why do you
insane.
think that would be? Why do you think there was something that happened after 13 years of nothing?
You know, this I'm finding is a bit of a common thing in a lot of cases where a home becomes a hotbed, you know, and it's funny because I recently spoke to my wife about this and I said, you know what I just realized? You like to go to garage sales. You like to pick up secondhand trinkets that you think, you know, would go well in the house. But we never stop to think maybe there's energy connected to those trinkets. Maybe there's something, you know, around that item that might be given off that vibe. I mean, you know, my wife, she likes her dolls and, you know, it is what it is. I am not a fan of them. Yeah. I told her to keep them in the attic. And then I realized, well, I have to go in the attic from time to time. So maybe,
how creepy
maybe
is that?
Don't put them in the attic.
Yeah, don't put them there. Listen,
you know,
let's not do that.
These things, you know, I'd like to refer to them as vessels. They sit for so long and they gather energy, you know, you got to think like these are things that come from natural things out in the world, like a wooden chair. You know, a wooden chair is a piece of nature, but you sit a wooden chair in a house where there's a lot of energy. You know, you've got hyperactive kids, you've got a busy mom, you've got, you know, everyone's running around, yelling, screaming, everyone's fighting for attention. And those items just absorb all that energy, man. And eventually, after so long, I feel like, bam, it pushes back.
I think you're probably right. You know, it's amazing how many of these cases that I've looked at this point where it seems like it starts from one of usually 3 things. And the first one is there's going to be a lot of people, I hear this every time, that disagrees with me. A Ouija board to me, listen, I don't touch them. I want nothing to do with them. Yeah. I've seen one too many Hollywood movies and I've heard one too many stories where it starts out with a freaking Ouija board, right?
Yep.
Now, that's one of three. Now, there's a side story that goes with this. And what the side story is, there's another child, the other daughter, and one of her friends supposedly brought a Ouija board into the house and they played with it. Now, not extensively. I couldn't find research that verified that 100%, but that's one of the side stories. So even though I've got no proof of it, in my eyes, that might be it. Listen, just because I don't like the Ouija board. Now, there's a series of you out there, and you definitely always let me know, Ouija board ain't nothing but a toy. Okay, a toy that maybe a demon uses, but that's my opinion, okay? The second one is sometimes people will bring things into a house that then causes, similar to what you're talking about. I call it the doggone Harry Potter Horcrux is what I call it. You know,
that's a good name. That's a good name.
Voldemort Horcrux action going on in the houses, okay?
Oh, yeah.
But I think that that's definitely a part of it. Actually, many of you know, but when I was 5 years old, I had my first paranormal experience, and I believe that's what that was to a degree. I had gotten up in the middle of the night. I saw a woman in the front room. I thought for sure that it would have been my mom and my dad talking because I could clearly hear this woman talking. And as I turned the corner and I saw her, she turned around to me and she goes, "What are you doing out of bed?" To which I thought to myself at 5 years old, okay, and who are you? But I didn't say that, of course. But, you know, it's amazing now when I go back and I look, and what makes that story so fascinating is I never told my mom or my dad that story my entire life. And my mom remembers that moment because she found me in the middle of the night sitting in a leather chair. And it's the only time in my entire childhood. And she made me go back to bed. I remember it because I went and sat on that chair looking at this, what I could only call a ghost. And it wasn't until we released a podcast, what's now been 2 years ago, where I described the woman that my mom said, "Hey, look at this picture and tell me," because what you're describing sounds a little bit like this woman. And she sent me the picture and it was the same woman. And that woman was my great grandmother.
Wow.
And come to find out, her dresser was in that house because, you know, when you've got a new kid in the house and, you know, expenses that's happening, there was a lot of stuff that was given to my parents to kind of get them started in life. And that dresser was one of them. So a lot of times I think there had to be some type of a connection between that dresser possibly and what I saw. Now, that was the only experience as a child that I ever had like that.
Wow.
But it goes back to the doggone Harry Potter Horcrux. That's how I look at that. But the other thing that I oftentimes look at is I believe sometimes there are those that have passed away or a certain energy has been allowed in a location and it opens what I like to call a portal. And there's a location I'm actually going to this fall with Nick. And it's said that house has a portal there that's opened, and it's not uncommon to get EVPs from people that has passed over. So that's going to be fascinating to kind of potentially see that in the living. But then when I look at a case like this, they bring up another very characteristic thing, and that's poltergeist phenomena.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really big because when we talk about, you know, any kind of poltergeist phenomena, we talk about people that's typically preteen or of the teenage years. And they think that the energy inside these children is what's causing that, you know, disturbance is what we'll call it. Now, did you give any thought to that when you looked into this case at all, John?
I did actually. You know, and if you look at Janet and Margaret's ages, you know, I'm going to take a guess here. This is not for the record. This is just me guessing. I feel like they're right around that age of where, you know, you would hit puberty, you're figuring yourself out, you've got all these different emotions, you know, different things are going on inside your mind and your body. And for a lot of kids, it's a rough time. It's a really rough time. You don't know how to express yourself. You've got these emotions that are building up inside of you. And that's a hardcore form of energy right there, you know, and you're trapping it in there and you don't want to let it out because you don't know if it's okay. You don't know who you can talk to. And yeah, I mean, if I was an entity and I'm moving around the ether and I'm like, man, you know, I need to latch on to something. And I see this bright glowing light of, you know, pubescence just exploding. I'm going to say, hey, there's my ticket.
Bingo. I think that's a good way to look at it also.
Oh, yeah.
You know, another thing that I don't typically talk about necessarily from a standpoint of how something gets in some place is demonic activity. Oof. And that's another thing that we kind of bridge the gap here. And, you know, it's interesting because when you look at demonic activity, the question often becomes why, and we already talked about the Ouija board version, so maybe that could have opened a door. But another interesting thing that I find is during this time frame when we talk about energy, which is what you was just talking about, there was a lot of things that was going on with Peggy and her husband. They were in the process of a divorce. So you got to remember, he's been in this role somewhat of, I've assumed like a protector even of the family. I mean, we're talking the 70s and things were vastly different in the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, now he's out of the equation. They're going through this divorce. I can only assume that there's all this extra negative energy. And sometimes I wonder, similar to what you're talking about, demons walking around, he goes, hey, party over here, folks.
Oh, absolutely. They key in on that energy. Yup, it's snack time.
Opportunities rattling on the door. Hey, let me in, folks. You know?
Oh, absolutely.
You know, but the crazy thing is we talk about these beginning stages of kind of what everything's going on, but that's just the beginning. I mean, you know, what started out as just simple disturbances that was happening inside the house with the bed shaking at night, that would soon escalate into one of the most well-documented poltergeist cases in the entire history. Like when we talk about it, I mean, Warner Brothers came out with their Conjuring series on the same story. Now, that one a little bit looser and some truths is how we'll put it. But, you know, the story goes from this little shaking bed to now hearing strange voices that would emerge from Janet, an entire family that felt trapped in what can only be described as a nightmare that would blur the line between the natural and the supernatural. You know what I mean? I mean, that's quite an escalation when you think about it. Shaking bed, straight to this kind of stuff.
Yeah, it jumps. It definitely jumps.
Now, you know, when you look at these timelines, it's not like things were happening just day after day after day. There was sporadicness. And I feel like Nick and I had a very interesting conversation when we did this episode, and we kind of flip-flopped in different ideas. I think at first we was kind of like, this might be a poltergeist. But then what we looked at was many of the things was uncharacteristic of a poltergeist. So I'm glad we talked about it because, you know, when we hear the Enfield Poltergeist, I think the assumption is, well, this is definitely a poltergeist. The specialist said it's poltergeist and this is what we got. But I think it's much deeper than that when we start looking at it.
Yeah.
So as this family's going on, all of these things are just growing stronger and stronger. The interesting thing is, especially with kids, and John and I both obviously have children, their toys, they started having these little pieces of manipulation that was happening. And by that, what I mean is, you know, the kids' toys, and again, it's the 70s. Things were made a little stronger back then.
Oh, yeah, they were.
They wasn't just breaking like they are nowadays. But these toys were being thrown. And when I'm talking about being thrown, we're not talking like a little soft throw. We're talking like a baseball being thrown, and it was being thrown with precision. You know, when we go and we buy toys for our children, they're supposed to be objects of joy, things of excitement, things to create imagination. Well, now these same toys, they were becoming weapons of fear. And I think that's the hard part You know, when you look at hauntings like this, and a lot of times, especially when we talk about demonic activity, the demons always feed off of fear, which is why it makes me really start to think that this was more than just a poltergeist activity that was occurring. So now what a demon typically feeds off of is isolation, right? They want to isolate family members. And now the dad's out of the picture.
Oh, yeah.
Mom's in a different room. Kids are kind of split up, and they're split up based on age a little bit, but they're all still in basically the same area. They do it based on fear, and then they walk into what's known as like a disbelief. So this home is now what used to be a spot of love and routine is now a nightmare that's never ending for this family. Now, John, imagine this. You're a kid, okay?
Yes.
You've already lost your sense of security. Dad's out of the house.
Mm-hmm.
Now your bed's shaking in the middle of the night. You're hearing bumping noises that no one can explain. Your mom, the person that you go to, she can't explain it. But now, even worse, your toys. It's almost like they're turning against you to a degree.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think the psychological impact would be for a kid that has all this stuff going on?
I mean, wow. That's a lot for a child, you know, and at an age where the mind is so malleable, you drop all this on it. And it's like, how does a child adjust to that? You know, there's only one way for these children to go. And unfortunately, it's inward, because how do they express everything that's going on? You know, kids don't come forward as much as you would like for them to. And it's just a natural mechanism, because it's like, how does a child with, you know, a limited intelligence, a limited vocabulary somewhat, go through these emotions and articulate themselves in a way to where they can make you believe what they're saying? And when a child feels like they don't have your trust, that just breaks them down.
Oh, yeah. 100%. And I'm sure even you, as you know, especially with younger kids, how many times do they come to you and they're like, Dad, I've got this thing and it bothers me. And you're trying to figure out what they're talking about, but they don't have the words yet to even grip that concept, right?
Absolutely. So
frustrating, because you really want to know what this is. Well, absolutely. Now, you know, these are a little bit older children.
Yeah.
But they're dealing with almost what's very much an adult subject matter when you think about it. I mean, their own mom can't explain it. Now you're giving it to kids?
Yeah.
I mean, the scary part of all this is all this activity went from sporadically happening to now becoming more aggressive, more relentless, and it become honestly more of a daily thing.
Oh, yeah.
And on top of all of that, it wasn't just aimed at the kids anymore. Now, when family would come over, you know, they would start targeting family. And when you talk about demons, I'm sure you'll agree, this seems to be like it's the playbook of all demonic activity.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, think of all the different cases of demonic stories. And it's like they all play from the same playbook. It's like, all right, first we got to cause something to invoke fear, and we got to isolate everyone, right? It's like the stages of possession, right? And I talk about this all the time. The first thing they do is they try to oppress. Once they oppress, then it goes to depression. Once it goes to depression, then it goes to possession. It's a playbook. It's literally the playbook. And I tell people, how do you fall for this when you've seen it 90 times just on cinema? Yet it's like, oh, I hear a scratching noise. Well, that's crazy. Man, I'm really depressed today, little Sally. And then like 2 weeks later, they're and their head's spinning around. It's like, how'd you not see it? It's right there in front of you the whole time.
Spitting up everywhere.
Exactly. You got some pea stew jumping out of your mouth. Jeez, EP.
you know?
But the worst part of the whole thing, I think, is, you know, we talk about the kids having these toys for their imagination, but now their imagination is working the opposite direction, because once fear is invoked, it's like, well, what's behind the bed? The demon's like, you know, I didn't even think about that. That's a great idea. Now we got to do something behind the bed. Well, what's behind the door? Demon's like, oh, this is good stuff. Let me write this down real quick. You know? So it's like now their imagination's working in a much worse way that would almost feed a demonic activity, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, all of that leads to what's going to happen next, which is literally the entity begins revealing itself in new and more terrifying ways. So as terrifying as everything was inside the home, it escalates to when you look at September of 1977. For those of you that don't know this story, we're about to take a very weird turn. That's when levitations began. And by that, what I mean is Janet and Margaret started reporting that they were levitating off of their actual beds. Now think about this. You're the parent. You're coming in. You're looking at your kid, and they're about 18 inches off of their bed. Now that's a guesstimate, right?
Yeah.
But you're looking at them. No part of their body is touching the bed. What's your thought process at that point?
Well, I mean, I'm going to probably, in the midst of it, throw a few choice words out there.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And then, I mean, how do you take that in? You know, how do you know, you put yourself in it. You know, you as the viewer, put yourself in it. You run upstairs, you bust that door open. Okay. You know your kids, you see your kids, but your kids are 18 inches off the bed. You know what you're looking at. You're wiping your eyes. You're taking it in. You get closer, and it's not a joke. It's not a gimmick. It's not a trick. How do you respond? I think it's just one of those situations where the brain just kind of burns itself out, and you kind of find yourself stuck just staring at them, not knowing what to do.
You know, and the funny thing is, Nick and I talk about this all the time. The number one thing of any skeptic is, well, if this event occurred, why didn't you take a picture of it? Why is there never a photo of it? And I'll be honest, I've had my own activity that's occurred where for the first, exactly what you're talking about, the first 5 minutes I'm looking at this, whatever it is or whatever the situation is, going, the hell is that?
Yeah.
I'm not even thinking about taking a photo. Hasn't even crossed my mind.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, if I walked in and I saw my kids levitating above the bed, I would walk right back downstairs and I'd say, we need some milk. And then I just wouldn't come back.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, listen, I hope y'all figure it out. Listen, you're 13. You're 13. Some people was getting married in the early 1900s at 13. Figure it out.
That's the thing, though, you know, it's like we watch these horror movies, you know, and we watch these, you know, the content on YouTube and all that. And we think about these situations and you're like, man, if I was in that situation, I'd lose my mind. And but the honest to God answer, if I walked in a room and my kids were levitating 18 inches off the bed, honest to God, my brain would probably revert back to basic terms, and I would probably look at them and say, well, stop making all this damn noise and go to sleep. And I would probably shut the door and I'd go sit back down, and my wife would say, as she always does, what happened now?
Don't even worry about it.
Jumping all over the bed, floating and
doing all kinds of crazy stuff.
She'd look at me and she'd be like, you okay? I'm good. All right, fine. Can we finish this movie? Yes.
Exactly. You know, but when you think about it, it's like, what do you like? How do you respond? Like, I don't know that. I think I would stare at them first, because the first reaction, I think, for any father would be to grab the kid
Yeah.
But then I would think, well, hell, what if it grabs a hold of me? Like, I don't know what this is. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's a scary thought just in and of itself.
Yeah, seriously.
So I'd kind of be like, okay, well, y'all come down now. Okay. You put them down. You put it and see if that works.
Yep.
If that doesn't work, I don't. Maybe.
If that doesn't work, I'm waking up my 3-year-old because he's terrifying. And exactly. I'm sending him in there.
Run in, son. Take care of whatever this is. Okay.
Yep. Handle that for me, buddy.
But, you know, seeing this kind of stuff has to be insane. Now, the interesting thing is with all this stuff that's starting to occur in the story, now the neighbors are starting to talk. And the story is starting to spread about this family. Now, I would think that that's both good and it's bad both. And the reason that I would say bad is because there's going to be people that's going to say they're lying, they're manipulating. It's not happening. They're seeking attention. But the validating side is going to be when the family can actually sit back and go, you know, I've seen this too. And now even the mom can be like, see, I told you. Like, this stuff is happening. And Gene across the street saw it. Or, you know, Billy Joel was over for, you know, whatever crazy board games, Yahtzee that they played back in the day or something. And they saw, you know, in this case, little Janet floating 18 inches above the bed. Like, now people starting to see it. So it's like a double-edged sword. And I'm not sure what side of that double-edged sword I'd want to be on, but it's no longer about a haunting. This house was becoming infamous for the activities that was occurring.
Oh, yeah.
Now, one thing, when you look at the stories that was happening before this one, levitation was very rare in any kind of ghost stories.
Yeah.
And if we're being honest, most of the stories that you hear that's happened after that, there's not a lot of stories about levitations after.
No.
So that was a major escalation in this story as well as any haunting story. Now, there was also no longer just the objects moving, but they were defying the laws of physics. And by that, when you throw a toy, we can explain that scientifically. We can't explain why it occurred, but we can say this is normal. But now you've got toys that's floating up, toys that's coming within inches of people and then falling straight down to the ground, almost like they've got a force field. And that's not normal. You can't explain that with science.
Yeah. So there's this one little incident. I figured I would bring this up really quick because you're talking about toys. Mm-hmm. So in September, I think somewhere around the 25th, you know, Peggy's like, I'm tired of being in this house. I'm tired of the kids being around this constant energy. We need to get out. Like, we need to, you know, go visit someone. Now, this is where you kind of try to figure out what's going on here. Is it the house or is it the children? Because Peggy goes to visit her brother, who literally lived around the corner from where she stayed. And while they're sitting at the table having tea, okay, they're sitting at this table, they're in the kitchen, they're having tea. There's no toys in sight. The wife of the husband is pouring tea, and out of nowhere, a Lego block drops from the ceiling and lands in the middle of the table. And what do you do in that situation when you're out of the area where you thought that the negativity was? You're in a whole new spot. You're trying to, you know, relieve some of that tension. You're trying to let go of some of that negative energy. You're having a hot cup of tea with family, someone who knows you well, your sibling, and out of nowhere, something happens and you're all just staring at each other and no one's got an answer. It's like, where do you find respite at that point?
That's a valid question. Let me ask you a question, though.
Yeah.
Let's say you're the brother.
Yes.
Your sister calls. Hey, John, do you mind if me and the kids come over? Well, why? What's going on? Well, I need a little break from the house. All the divorce getting to you? Oh, man, I've been watching my kids levitate and stuff in the house. If you're the brother,
I'm going to say, girl.
Yeah, come on over. Like, what do you say?
You know? Yay, listen. So before you get here, I'm going to put a bottle of holy water outside. I'm going to need you to sprinkle them kids because, girl, we trying to keep it positive up in here.
Exactly. Like,
I would definitely take her in, though. You know, I'd say, well, come on over.
John might be nicer than me. I don't have a sibling, so I don't know what that's like. But I think if I got that same phone call, I'd be like, one more time, one more time again. I think we was breaking up. What? They're levitating? Like, you mean they're jumping? Oh no, they're how far off the bed? You know, I didn't tell you this. I didn't think it was pertinent until just now. One of the kids, I think they've got Ebola and the flu. You know, if you want to come over, I understand. I heard there's death that's occurring with it. Luckily, our kid, you know, hasn't died yet, but
not yet.
You know, I don't know that I would let her in the house. I'm just being honest.
I don't know. I guess it depends on who answers the phone. Now, is John answering the phone or is the Midnight Spectre answering the phone? Because if the Midnight Spectre answers the phone, I'm like, okay, so here's what we gonna do, sis. You're gonna come here and I'm gonna go there. Right. I'm gonna get my camera, my recorders, everything. Right. And you mind if I borrow your place for a bit? And I'm making it happen.
You know, I had a funny situation happen, and it's kind of along the lines of the story. So, you know, in all these cases, we hear about the knocking and the scratching that happens on walls and stuff.
Yeah.
It was a few weeks ago, and I'm laying in bed. It was a Saturday. So, you know, Saturdays, you don't rush out of bed. That's crazy talk. Yeah. Right? That's for all the crazy people that get up at like 8 o'clock on a Saturday.
You know?
No. So this was like 9 o'clock. I have to work at 10 o'clock on Saturday. So I'm like, I got an hour, you know. No one has to see me. So like if I get out in a pair of shorts and a t-shirt, you know, life is good. So I'm sitting there in bed and I'm scrolling through social media and I hear this scratching noise that's happening on my right-hand side. Now on the right-hand side, clearly you guys don't know the layout of my house, and I would also not like you to know the layout of my house. I hope you guys never learn the layout of my house, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. So on the right-hand side of me, there's a closet, a bathroom on the other side of the wall, and then all of our kids' bedrooms. So I'm hearing this scratching noise, and like I'm sure many of you parents, I'm like, the heck is that scratching noise? Like, is that one of my kids? And then you're sitting there and you're like really focused and you're trying to figure out which one of the heathens is doing something that they shouldn't be doing. And the more I sit there, the more I go, are they like, did a picture fall off the wall? And they're trying to, you know how sometimes you're trying to find that nail in the background, you're scraping but I'm like, man, they've been doing this for like 15 minutes. There's not going to be any paint left in that spot if they don't stop. So I'm sitting there thinking, you know, I'm going to have to get up. I'm going to have to put a stop to this. So as I'm starting to get up, I notice that the scratching is no longer on my right. It's on the left-hand side. Now you're probably saying, hey, Bert, what's on the left-hand side of your house? So that's a window to the outside. Okay. Now, unless my kids have crawled across the roof and is now on the other side, this is clearly not my kids. So the next thing I'm sitting there thinking is, well, that's interesting. That's definitely not children. Is that like a squirrel or something? Like, I know it's cold, but then I started noticing that the sounds was flipping back and forth. And I thought, well, that's extremely odd. Like, I've not heard this before. Now, for those of you that's probably like, well, that's kind of scary, because this is exactly how all ghost stories start. I hit up the good old buddy Nick, you know, from the other podcast. I'm like, dude, I need to talk to you real quick. So I tell him about all this stuff and I'm breaking it all down. He goes, dude, are you scared? And I'm like, am I scared? Hell no. He goes, well, why aren't you scared? I said, dude, I'm about to exploit the life out of this. What are you talking about? This house is for rent every night, $350.
Oh my God.
That's $10,000 a month. I'm retiring, folks. Listen, I don't need to go to a haunted location. I have my own.
There you go.
And he told me, he goes, well, if that demon really did come there and that's what that is, you know, he's going to stop. And I'm like, yeah. I hope not, man, because this is my money. This is my money pit. It's how I'm getting out this mug. And yeah, it hasn't scratched since. So I think he figured out what was going on. Dang it. I really thought I had some.
it wasn't profitable for him. He said, I could have gained a soul out of this and I lost out. So
he's like, man, that one time I went to Georgia taught me everything. Who would have thought that guy could play that violin that good?
Right. It's been downhill ever since,
man. But it's crazy because, we hear those stories and you see stuff like that in real life and you go, well, what in the heck is all that? Now, I'm assuming, John, you just probably didn't wake up one day and you said, you know what I want to be? I want to be a paranormal storyteller. I'm assuming you had to have had some type of experience, right?
Ooh, boy, have I. So definitely have some stories. Now, I'll give a story, but you guys can definitely go check out a more in-depth video on my channel, Dark Story Time, where I give you a bunch of stories that I've had. But I'll try to think of one of the shortest and creepiest ones.
Oh, we like short and creepy.
So I want to say I was about 18 years old. It's summertime, height of my life. I'm going to clubs. I'm having a ball. I'm coming home at 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning. And when I sleep, I am a hard sleeper. When I say I'm a hard sleeper, even now to this day, my wife will be talking to me the next day and she's like, so you didn't hear me calling you and I moved you and I shook you and nothing. And I'm like, what? Like, when did you do all this? It's so weird because then she starts snoring in her sleep and I'm wide awake. I'm like, so why can't I sleep through that? But I guess whatever. So I'm out cold. Now, in the house that I lived in, it was a duplex that my aunt bought and turned into one big house. Mm-hmm. So you had a basement, a main level, technically a third level, second level, and then you had an attic. So I'm on the second to third level if you count the basement, and I'm in a back room and I'm passed out. I'm still partially drunk, and I had this cousin that lived with us and she had one of those voices that it was the last thing you wanted to hear at 8 o'clock in the morning. So yep. I'm in bed, I'm passed out, I'm sleeping, and all of a sudden I hear her screaming my name from the kitchen. And she's like, John. And now I'm like, if I ignore her, she'll stop because she'll realize I'm not going to answer her. And I didn't respond. And she just kept calling me, John. So finally I shout, what? And it gets quiet. And I sit for a minute and nothing. So I'm like, all right, cool. So I go back to sleep. John. So fine. Now I'm like, I go from calm and exhausted to furious. And I jump up on the side of my bed and I'm not going to lie. I'm kind of having a temper tantrum here. And I stomp my feet on the floor and I'm like, what? And she calls me again. Now I'm wide awake. She calls me again. She says, John. And I go, what? And then she says, never mind. And it was like someone just threw gasoline on the fire. And I said, no. And I jump up and I'm stomping down the hallway. I hang a right. I stomp down the steps. I hang a left and I'm stomping into the kitchen. And as I step into the kitchen, my mood goes from furious to completely terrified so fast that it gave me a headache because I realized I was the only one in the house.
Oh, yeah.
So I pick up the phone immediately and I call my aunt and I say, hey, what are you guys doing? And she says, what are you talking about? We left around 7:30. We're getting some things done before we go to church. Mind you, this was on a Sunday. And I'm like, okay, well, can I speak to Kelly? Kelly was my cousin. She goes, yeah, she's right here. And when she said that, I just was like, never mind. And I hung up the phone. And I stood in the kitchen and every hair on my body was standing on end. Now you hear people say that. You hear people say my blood ran cold. My hair stood on it. No, I promise you, I relate it to if you've ever had an IV. To anyone who's ever had an IV and has had a saline drip done, that sensation you get of the cold, cool feeling that goes through your veins, that's exactly what it felt like. And I could feel the goosebumps all over my body. I didn't know what to do, but because I was still partially drunk, I walked my butt back upstairs and I went to bed.
He's like, you know what?
I went to bed.
I don't remember none of this in my dream, so we're going right back to that.
It's crazy because I found out later on why that house had such high activity. Because earlier in the video, we talked about coming forward and speaking about your experiences because you don't know what someone else could be going through. Right. And I had that situation happen where I came down to the breakfast table one day and I was so tired. I hadn't experienced the prior night and it kept me up most of the night. And I come down into the kitchen and I see two of my cousins and my uncle sitting at the table. And I finally looked at them and I said, I can't do this anymore. And I need to tell one of you guys, I need you guys to know that there's things going on in this house. And as soon as I said that, everyone stopped eating and they looked at me. And the first words that two of the three of them said was, wait, you too? And that was my confirmation. And let me tell you, that right there gave a feeling that is just undescribable because it was like the relief of knowing that you're not crazy. You're not just seeing things. It's not being made up and people aren't judging you. These people are going through the same thing. And
exactly.
Yeah, it's wild, man.
That's like one of my biggest fears is a mimic.
Ooh.
Because so many stories of mimics when they do that stuff, it creeps me out because I'm sitting there thinking, where are they leading me to? And then you have doubts of, is this even whomever it's supposed to be? And then you're stuck with that the rest of your life.
Yep.
You know what I mean? I don't know. That's like my worst fear. I dealt with one thing that was a mimic or mimic-ish one time. Yeah. And I never tell that story because I freak myself out every single time I tell it.
Ooh.
So, yeah. But I've had one mimic experience in my entire life. And it was, it sticks with me to this day. Like if I was to make a horror movie, 100% it'd be about a mimic. Because that to me, that's the scariest thing ever.
Oh yeah. I cover mimics quite a lot on my YouTube channel because I find them so fascinating. And there's actually, so I don't know, many of you might be familiar with the whole Ouija board thing. And there's an entity attached to the Ouija board. It kind of goes hand in hand. You hear this name a lot when you talk about Ouija boards is the name Zozo. And I did a little background investigation on this entity a while back and found out that it likes to actually take on the personifications of a mimic. And what it does is it leads you to that specific area that's calling you from. And when it gets you there, spiritually, it attaches itself to you. And then, yes, like you said, you're stuck with it for a very long time.
Yeah, I'm good. This is why I see some kids floating in some bedrooms. Listen, it's been real. It's been fun.
Babe, call your mother.
Fun. Yeah, listen.
She needs to come get these kids. They floating.
Yep. There's a line in the sand for old Bert. You get floating. Man. Listen. Nothing I can do for you. There's nothing in my parental handbook that told me how to deal with floating. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. Got to go to grandma's.
Yeah, because next your head is spinning. You're puking that pea soup. I'm good. I'm good. I don't need none of that. Yeah. No.
Oh, man. I couldn't imagine.
And that's literally what even these kids was dealing with. I mean, the stuff they had going on. That's why I sit there and I think to myself, this has to be some form of demonic activity. Like it has to be, in my opinion. You know, the interesting thing is, though, they have all this stuff going on, all this escalated activity.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to ask you because you already know, but they call the police first instead of going to any kind of like religious institute. Me?
Yeah.
I be in the bedrooms putting the crosses with my fingers if I don't have any on.
Oh my God. Yep. Absolutely.
Sprinkling little Janet with some holy water. Margaret, I'm sitting there using my feather to put some incense over on her bed.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, they go to the police. Now imagine, if you will, I can't even imagine. Imagine the police get this call. Yeah, how can we help you? 911, how can we help you? Yeah, so I need you to come over. Okay, what can you describe to us what the crime is? Well, I don't know if this counts as a crime, but my daughter's floating. She's what, ma'am? She's floating. You said your daughter's float. Well, technically both of my daughters have float. Okay, ma'am. Yeah, we're going to send someone right over. And then they get there and they see it.
Oh my God.
If you're the police, you're like, do I shoot it? Or do I, like, what do you do?
What do you do? Oh.
And the worst part of the whole thing is there's nothing they can do. So they're literally sitting there the whole time going, we can't help with this. Like, this is out of our realm.
Yeah. It's crazy too, because it got to a point where she reached out to the police one of many times, and they didn't even want to come back to her house. They were afraid. They were afraid to go back to the house. And because they did that, and that's one of the things is they didn't know what to do, and they were scared because they couldn't do anything about what was happening. And that's why I always say, it takes a different turn when law enforcement gets involved, because now you have documented evidence. You have police reports. Like, these police showed up to see chairs wobbling and sliding across the floor, and the girls weren't next to them. Right. And it's how do you explain, how do you put that on your certified police report? Chair was undulating. I
couldn't even imagine. Like, if I'm a cop, let's say there's two of us walking. Let's say John and I are both cops. Okay, we walk into the spot. We're like, yeah, supposedly there's some levitation or something. Yeah. Someone's playing David Copperfield over here. You get there and you watch it, and you go, John, did you see that? Like, they're legit floating.
Oh yeah.
And then that's where I go, hey, John, hey, you're filling out the report this time, right?
Yeah, and that's going to be the argument the whole way back to the station. Who's doing the? I'm not writing that. I'm not writing that. Did you see it? Did you? Because if you didn't see it, I didn't see it.
Exactly what I'm saying.
I didn't. Okay. Because how do you do?
That's exactly it. But what it reminds me of is even the Lindley Street haunting. The Lindley Street haunting was the same gig. And they even said in the beginning when they went over there, they didn't even know how to fill out a report.
Yeah.
Or like the Ammons family haunting. Have you covered that story?
I've not yet.
So the Ammons family haunting, this is a great one. The interesting thing about the Ammons family haunting is the boy, he kind of went through a form of possession. They take him to the hospital. They basically required that he go to the hospital to be medically evaluated with doctors and nurses. So again, I put them in the same spectrum as what I would a police officer. They're watching as this boy is crawling up the side wall of the hospital and then crawling across the ceiling. And they said, I don't even know how to fill that out.
Ooh, the Ammons. Yes. I know it by another name. The Hell House.
Yes, the Hell House. Yes. Same one. But I mean, how do you fill that out?
I think the best part of that story is when they had the CPS caseworker come in.
Yes.
Because, they come in and they're like, ma'am, your kid's walking up the walls, clearly you're on drugs. And this case woman looked at this boy back himself up the wall and immediately her first thought was, nope.
Yep. Not today.
Nope.
I was about to take this case.
Yeah.
But I saw a documentary that old John and Bert did about these police officers that didn't do their report. Listen, I'm not doing mine either.
I'm not doing mine, man. Oh,
that's crazy to me.
I love those cases too, man, because it's like you had crowds of neighbors gathering in the street, looking into the house and seeing things happen. And it was like, where do you go from there? Where do you go from there?
The crazy part is the way that they went with that is they moved from what they were doing, which was the police, and then letting other people's see it. And they kind of started moving towards who else can potentially help. And it blows my mind that, like, for me, the first thing I would have done is probably went to a religious institution. All seriousness, that, because if I'm sitting there thinking, it's kind of like the age-old movie, right? Who are you going to call? Yeah. Well, there ain't no Ghostbusters, so I'm calling, Father something, fill in a name. So, they're through the process to where they're about to begin this process of looking at who else can help. Yeah. And the interesting thing for me is, before they even get to this point, like, the police are there, the neighbors are there, is doing a very interesting thing. Now the entity is starting to speak out of the walls. It starts like a whisper, but it's kind of mocking them to a degree. Yeah. It's revealing very intimate details about their life, in which the story I did last week, for those of you, or I'm sorry, 2 weeks ago when this comes out, you guys will see it's on the Moffat family. And what I find very interesting is this belief that was also demonic activity, and it was also mocking people. And that's, again, something where I look and I go, this case there's mocking, this case there's mocking, that case over there's mocking. And eventually you go, well, clearly, there's something to it. This is all the same thing. And the interesting thing is, this entity out loud, where everyone could hear it, would talk to Janet and go, Janet, you're 11, right? Hey, Billy, I know you're scared, Billy. You're scared. The scariest part for me is it's providing details of things that it wouldn't know if it wasn't a part of the house and a part of their everyday life. Yeah. And for a kid, that would have to be devastating, because now your mom can't protect you. Your dad's not even there. Yeah. The police, who's supposed to protect everybody, they're dumbfounded and they don't know what to say.
They're just as scared as you are.
Just as scared as you are. Now this thing is mocking you. I mean, think about just hearing ghostly voices inside your house. I mean, they're calling your name, telling you things you don't know, mocking your own fears. Like, imagine being scared. As a man, a lot of times we're scared and we don't say anything, but this knows you're scared and it's calling you out on it. John, I know you're scared. Oh yeah. You're acting tough, but you can't see me. You can't sense me, but you can hear me, John. And I know you're scared. I mean, how creepy would that be? Oof. I couldn't even imagine.
I mean, that combined with like the growling and the barking, sounding like a rabid dog. And it's like, when you're standing in a room and everyone in the room was within eyesight, and you can see everyone's mouth. And, and that no one's in here barking at you, but you hear it loud and clear, and then you're hearing a voice just materializing out of thin air that doesn't sound like anyone in the room. And it's like you said, it's giving out this personal information. And it's like, I see why the police were terrified.
Correct. Because on top of all of that, like the fact that, now this entity is saying it's a former resident. It's letting that be known out in the public, just where everyone can hear. It's giving their ages, their names, personal fears, personal information. Oh, yeah. The psychological toll that would have to take on people is a whole completely different level. Oof. But then the entity starts to make itself more visible, which is kind of where this story starts to take a little turn. And I'm sure you guys would love to know more about that. But guess what? To do that, you're going to have to go over to John's channel. We're going to be creating a secondary video that's going to be a part of this entire 2-part series. And if you're going to want to hear what happens next, and trust me, if you've heard the story, you're going to want to come back and see part 2. I'm going to leave a link in the description down below. My assumption is John will probably put this video out a week after mine. That'll give you guys time to see this video, subscribe to his channel, and be on the lookout. But hopefully y'all enjoyed this rendition. I definitely appreciate everyone that stopped by. I want to thank John so much for stopping by and telling this much of the story. But until we see you on the next podcast, goodbye.